Hey true believers, you're not going to believe this mail call. We're talking Marvel Bronze Age history, and it's giant size. Hi everyone and welcome back to Still Only 35 Cents. For this one, I'm talking Marvel Comics, but not just any Marvel Comics. These are the legendary giant size issues from Marvel's Bronze Age. This year saw Marvel celebrate the 50th anniversary of these great giant size comics, and they reprinted a number of back issues as facsimiles, as well as creating some brand new giant size titles. The giant size comics were, as the title suggests, oversized Marvel comic books which featured for the most part new one-shot stories in them. Giant size allowed for bigger stories, more epic artwork, as well as introduction of major new characters and concepts, such as the first appearance of Lilith in giant-sized chillers featuring Dracula, the wedding of Scarlet Witch and Vision in giant-size Avengers 4, and of course the relaunch of the all-new, all-different X-Men in giant-size X-Men #1. And behold, it is the Holy Grail giant-size X-Men #1. This isn't just a comic, this is a piece of history and where it all changed. New Mutants, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Thunderbird, and of course, Wolverine joining the team. This comic introduced the world to the X-Men we know and love today. The background of the Marvel giant size books was an interesting progression for Marvel and oversized books. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button and ringing the notification bell for future videos. Marvel had started publishing annuals back in the Silver Age with new lead stories and other filler material, mainly pin-ups, backups and reprints, but by the early 70s had all but mostly become reprints before being cancelled. So in 1974 they decided to revive the oversized format with the giant sized books, produced quarterly instead of annually. They followed up the same progression, starting with mostly new material and ending up being mostly reprints before again being discontinued when Marvel relaunched their annuals, again with new material, in 1976. Marvel's original plan was to publish a line of Supergiant comics in line with DC's 100-page Super Spectacular, 100 pages for 60 cents, and were planning to have both Supergiant and giant-sized comics running alongside each other as well as their regular size line, with the Supergiants featuring one new story alongside reprints priced at 60 cents, whilst giant-sized comics would be all new material at 35 cents. Marvel Editorial finally landed on a combination of the two and decided to publish 2 giant-sized comics per month with rotating headline features. Giant-sized Superstars would star the Fantastic Four, then Spider-Man, then Conan, whilst giant-sized chillers would feature Curse of Dracula, then Werewolf by Night, and then Man-Thing. The first issue of each was published, giant-sized Superstars and giant-sized chillers at 35 cents each, before the plan changed again. Instead of Spidey and Werewolf headlining those second issues, they instead got their own first issues, giant-sized superheroes starring Spider-Man and giant-sized creatures with Werewolf by Night. Following these issues, plans changed yet again. Firstly, the books got bigger. Now they were 68 pages for 50 cents with one new story and one or more reprints. Secondly, instead of continuing the umbrella titles like giant-sized Superstars or giant-sized chillers, they more sensibly went with giant-sized Conan and giant-sized Man-Thing. Consequently, the second issues of 3 of the initial 4 were titled Giant-Sized Fantastic Four, Giant-Sized Dracula, and Giant-Sized Werewolf. Giant-Sized Spider-Man, however, started over with a new first issue and a new premise, essentially giant-sized Marvel team-up. Interestingly, those months that Giant-Sized Spider-Man was published, Spidey took a break from his regular Marvel team-up title, with the Human Torch headlining the regular-sized comic book in those months. More giant-sized titles were introduced alongside these, and giant-sized Kid Colt 1 and 3 are particularly interesting because they feature team-ups with the Rawhide Kid and Knight Rider, aka Ghost Rider. These stories are thought to be unused inventory from the cancelled Western Team Up series, which ended unexpectedly after only one issue. Marvel launched 3 new Giant Size series in their second year: Giant Size X-Men, Invaders, and Supervillain Team Up. But as the Giant Size line was winding down, the 3 issues reverted to regular size series. X-Men picked up where it left off with its original numbering at issue 94, whilst Invaders and Supervillain Team Up began brand new issue number 1s. Finally, the Giant Size line expanded to include reprints featuring popular characters like Iron Man, Daredevil, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, Power Man, Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel. The final issues of some once all new stories such as Avengers, Fantastic Four, and Conan also reverted to reprints before the Giant Size line was eventually cancelled. These Giant Size books were for the most part one-and-done stories, but were reflected in the main continuity of the respective series. So in a very real sense, the Giant Size books of 1974 and 1975 are a unique microcosm of the larger annual format used by Marvel throughout the years. So with that, let's take a look at my recent Giant Size mail call. So let's start going through these books. So first up, we have Giant Size Avengers number 1, featuring the threat of Nuclear, a brand new story by Roy Thomas and art by Rich Buckler. It also features, outside the original story, a Human Torch story from Marvel's Golden Age. Next up, we have Giant Size Avengers number 2, featuring Kang the Conqueror, Rama Tut, and the shocking death of an Avenger. Story by Steve Englehart and art by the awesome Dave Cockrum. As well as a bonus reprint of the first appearance of Rama Tut. Next up, we have Giant Size Avengers number 3 with the Titans Out of Time. Story by Steve Englehart and script by Roy Thomas with Dave Cockrum and Joe Galliella on art. With a special reprint of the Avengers battling the Space Phantom. Story by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Next up is the aforementioned Giant Size Avengers number 4. This features the wedding of Vision and Scarlet Witch. Story by Steve Englehart. Pencils by Don Heck. Let's go to the wedding page. And a reprint of The Astonishing Ant-Man Betrayed by Ants, with a story by Stan Lee and Larry Lieber and art by the legendary Jack Kirby. Next up is Giant Size Conan number 1. Roy Thomas script and Gil Kane art. Great pin-up of the high point of the Empire of Acheron. And another reprint of the Roy Thomas and Barry Smith Conan the Barbarian series. Next up is Giant Size Dracula number 2, the follow-on from Giant Size Chillers number 1. Story by Chris Claremont and Don Heck on art duties. With an interesting On With the Dance backup story, with script by Stan Lee and art by Russ Heath. Next up is Giant Size Doctor Strange issue 1, with story by Jim Lawrence and Dan Atkins. And featuring a reprint of Strange Tales 168, The Exile Story. Next up is Giant Size Fantastic Four number 2, with the Thing time travelling back in time, Jerry Conway writer, John Buscema and Chick Stone on art. As well as an early FF reprint with the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby story featuring the Red Ghost and his indescribable super apes. Next up is one of my favourite. It's Giant Size Invaders featuring Captain America, the Human Torch and the Submariner in this great first issue. With a story by Roy Thomas and art by Frank Robbins. And a great Golden Age backup strip featuring the Submariner. Next is Giant Size Master of Kung Fu, featuring 5 all-new sagas starring the one and only Shang-Chi. What a great cover. Doug Mensch on story with Paul Galassi and Dan Atkins on art. With a great Yellow Claw backup strip as the reprint. Next up is Giant Size Master of Kung Fu number 2. Again, Doug Mensch on story and Paul Galassi on art with Jack Abel on inks. Once again, we're treated to another reprint of Yellow Claw. Next up is Giant Size Master of Kung Fu issue 3. Again, story by Doug Mensch, Paul Galassi on art and Vince Colletta on inks. And as can be expected, a reprint from Yellow Claw number 2. Next up is Giant Size Master of Kung Fu issue 4. With another story by Doug Mensch, this time Keith Pollard on arts and Sal Trapani on inks. And lo and behold, for our back issue reprint. It's the Yellow Claw from Yellow Claw number 2. Next up is Giant Size Spider-Man number 2, featuring the Master of Kung Fu. A great team up, and as I mentioned earlier, another one of those titles which replaced Marvel Team Up. Story by Len Wein and art by Ross Andrew, with Al Milgrom on inks. With a reprint of Spider-Man Annual number 3, where Spider-Man attempts to become an Avenger. Next up is Giant Size Spider-Man featuring Doc Savage. This is issue number 3 of the Giant Size Spider-Man run. Jerry Conway story, Ross Andrew on art, and Mike Esposito on inks. Wonderful stuff. And a special reprint this issue, the first meeting of Daredevil and Spider-Man from Spider-Man issue 16. Next up is Giant Size Spider-Man and the Punisher. This is issue 4. My understanding is this is the 3rd appearance of the Punisher. Story by Jerry Conway, art by Ross Andrew, and inks by Mike Esposito. Our reprint is The Wondrous World of Doctor Strange, co-starring Spider-Man, from Doctor Strange 179. Next up is Giant Size Spider-Man number 5, featuring Man-Thing. Jerry Conway on writing duties, and Ross Andrew and Mike Esposito on art and inks respectively. Great to see these. And we close with the reprint of Where the Beatles Flies, featuring a guest appearance from the Human Torch. This is from Spider-Man 21. Next up is Giant Size Werewolf issue 5, the last in the Giant Size Werewolf run. Story by Doug Mensch and art by Young Montana and Marcos Pelayo as letterer. With a He's Coming to Get Me story reprint at the back. Originally presented in World of Fantasy 11. And to close us off, the book that started it all, one of the first 2 Giant Size books. This is Giant Size Superstars, featuring the Fantastic Four and that classic battle between the Thing and the Hulk. With story by Jerry Conway and art by Rich Buckler and inks by Joe Sinnott. A great battle. With some nice pin-ups to complete the issue. So that's it. What do you think? Are these Giant Size comics the most underrated treasures in Marvel history? Let me know in the comments below. Have you seen any of these books out in the wild? Do you own any? Please share your thoughts and let's discuss down below. I've got a lot more vintage Marvel goodness to share with you next time, and we're going to be diving into the lost archives of Marvel UK. You won't want to miss that one. We've just launched channel memberships here on Still Only 35 Cents, and for $2.99 US a month you can join the other members of the price variants and get access to exclusive members only videos and live streams, including videos with comic creators and a new sketch show. All the proceeds from channel memberships will be going to the Hero Initiative. And with that, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you very soon. Don't forget to check out our other great videos, as well as our weekly live stream, the Merry Monday Mailcall Show, every Monday at 7:30 AM Australian Eastern, as well as follow us on Instagram, Facebook and X at Still Only 35 Cents. Enough said.